Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. Whataburger is in the news today, and the big question is, does Whataburger have the right to discriminate against their customers? And recently, Texas passed a law. They're very progressive law. They said that you can own a gun, you can carry a gun, and you can do open carry. And that's going to be the law of the land in Texas come January 1st. But the question is, what do you think about Whataburger's right to discriminate against people who would walk into their establishment with a pistol on their hip? I mean, this is a serious problem because it has to do with discrimination, and I don't know, if we're not careful in analyzing this, people might think you have a right to discriminate.
Yeah, Whataburger announced just over the weekend, I think, that despite the new law, which does have an exemption for private property, as would be obvious, that Whataburger would rather its customers not openly carry guns into the restaurant.
Well, you know, what this suggests, though, is that Whataburger's establishments are private property. Therefore, they are establishing a principle that they have a right to discriminate based on property rights. But I don't think that's the way the country looks at it. The courts don't look at it. The liberals don't look at it this way. Matter of fact, the liberals don't have a whole lot of respect for property rights, and they don't realize that all civil liberties and all rights are property rights. You know, to me, like if you want the right to worship in a church, it's the property that permits you your privacy. You can go in there and worship any way you want, and the government has no right to restrain you because it's private, and we can do this in our home. But all of a sudden, there's a group of people in this country that for the past 100 years has been gradually eroding this principle of property rights and saying, well, anything that involves property, it's public property. So I think there we run into the problem and a lot of confusion.
Just as if someone coming over to visit you for Sunday dinner, you might ask them not to have a gun on their hip. A restaurant, this particular one as a private business, should have that right as well, right?
Right. I think that is it, and most people would say that is true, but they're so anxious to, to be the kingpin, to define political correctness, to define the law, and they have no interest whatsoever in trying to reconcile their inconsistency in saying that a civil liberty also involves the civil liberty of owning property. But then you'll say, well, somebody might do something we don't like. And, you know, that is the most difficult thing for both liberals and conservatives, to restrain themselves for people to do something with their property or how to instruct people how to behave. And they say, well, they're misbehaving. They're using their free time to gamble. We don't want them to gamble, so therefore we have laws against them. In others, in economics, they'll say, well, they might discriminate and there's not a fair distribution and we have to have equity and equality. So therefore we have to have kingpins. We have to have the moralists who's going to get in and say this. But don't you think there's going to be some people, matter of fact, I think there was one individual who responded to this. He says, if they're not going to let me walk in with my gun on my hip, I'm not going in there.
Well, he's discriminating as well, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, well, why? He has a right to discriminate. See, they don't see that. The planners and the do-gooders say that they only see one side of it. And sometimes it's a conservative side and sometimes it's a liberal side. Yeah. Rather than emphasizing the point that the protection of liberty, it's protection of life, protection of liberty, and protection of property. And they put these all together. If you really understood that and followed that, you don't need to itemize our rights. And you know, some of our founders objected to itemizing it because if they didn't list it, then you don't have a right to do it. And some of you people, liberals sometimes even argue that the Constitution allows the government to do anything they're not prohibited from doing. It's actually turning it on its head, you know.
It's unfortunate that these things aren't guided by principle, because you could imagine those very same people on the left that would applaud this not allowing guns are the same ones that would call for someone to be imprisoned or fined for not baking a cake for a same-sex marriage.
And how many liberals do you think are going to shout and say something about this and saying they don't have a right to discriminate, you know? But then again, if you set this principle, it would be a different world. But then again, individuals may do things that we wouldn't like, and property owners may do the same thing, not realizing that most of what they claim we should fear would never happen, even though in spite of our history and everything else, people work in their own self-interest. But it wouldn't be argued if they understood what civil liberties are and how important it is to include property in this condition.
And it's also a statement on the beauty of the market, because if enough people reacted like this gentleman and said, I'm not going to go there, Whataburger then would face a choice. Do I change my policies? And because that's what the market is telling me people are voting with their money, or do I hold out and discriminate even though it may cost me?
I think you make the point that Austrian economics teaches, and it says that the economic system is designed in a free society for the consumer, not for the businessman and not for labor, for the consumer. And you vote. You discriminate. Every penny you spend, now it has to be every $10. Every dollar you spend is a vote. So you're discriminating. But everything that we do is discriminating. The fact that you're sitting right here, you discriminated against some other people who would like to have you on their show. So we all discriminate with our time, but they've taken that word and twisted it, because to be indiscriminate means, you know, you don't care. To discriminate and pick and choose and make right decisions, you know, that's entirely different. But when people make bad decisions, instead of waiting for the market to punish them, somebody else wants to come in and have a law and use force, and if you don't do what we want, if you use drugs, we're going to put you in prison. If you don't do this in your stores, and you don't hire, and you don't have a fair balance and follow our rules, we're going to punish you. So it's this willingness by government and the agents of government and the special interests, big business and special interest groups, to use force to make other people do our bidding and have so little confidence, you know, in a free society. But people should do the right thing for the right reason. And most of the time, I would think almost always, if people do things that we don't like, just ignore them. You know, like you say, this person that didn't want to go into the store, just ignore them, you know, and maybe they would change their tune. But I think it's such a mess, because if you use the principle of using property for a businessman to do what he wants, you get painted as a racist, you're horrible. You would probably say that you can pick and choose who you hire and who you fire. You know, if you run a Japanese restaurant, maybe you can't hire Hispanics to work in there. I mean, all kinds of silly stuff, rather than saying, do what you want, just don't force people and don't hurt people, and protect everybody's property equally, and you wouldn't have this thing. So as far as the conclusion here goes, you know, I think Whataburger is not doing anything bad. They shouldn't be punished. And of course, you don't have to worry about the liberals. They're not going to come and try to punish them and say, well, you know, we don't want you to discriminate. This principle. But can you realize what the conclusion will be? If this is recognized as the right to discriminate, maybe it would come back to emphasize the importance of property rights. That, to me, folks, I think is the important issue, is to concentrate on the importance of owning property and accepting the principle that you never can use force or fraud to hurt other people, and never use the government to force your conditions and your belief on others, and that to discriminate is something every single one of us does hundreds of times every day. Every time you get up and move, and what you buy and eat and go to, and what store you go into, what church you go into, you're always discriminating. You say, no, you're making wise choices. Yeah, but you have rejected something else. You might buy a newspaper that you like or not buy it. You might reject the newspaper. You might go to the internet. everything is discrimination, picking and choosing. That is what a free society is all about. We shouldn't be frightened by freedom of choice and the right and principles that are designed by life, liberty, and property. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.